Zelensky surrenders to Trump and will sign mineral deal within hours.
Nice.
This is something that we were debating on talking about. We didn't have any news at the beginning of the show, but Daily Mail is reporting Donald Trump appears to have won his trade standoff with Volodymyr Zelensky as the Ukrainian president is set to give in and sign a deal giving the U.S. access to deposits of critical minerals. The deal was seen as crucial for satisfying Washington's demands for a peace settlement between Ukraine and Russia to end the 3-year-long war. It's a staggering surrender from Zelensky, who I had said just days earlier, I defend Ukraine. I can't sell our country. I don't know that he's actually selling it, but Zelensky said on Friday that officials from his country and the U.S. are working on concluding an economic deal to ensure that the accord worked for and was fair to Kiev. We're signing an agreement hopefully in the next fairly short period of time, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office when asked about a deal for Ukraine's minerals. Do you think that that's because Donald Trump sometimes gets out over his skis? Do you think that this is one of those cases?
No. I mean, well, Trump is in a position to kind of dictate terms, right? Like as we are. I mean, the Ukrainian defense is overwhelmingly dependent on American funding and American goodwill.
Yeah.
So, Trump coming in, and I mean, Zelensky made some real mistakes in over the last few years, but I don't think there's a bigger one than deciding to go to Pennsylvania and effectively campaign for the Democrats.
100% agree.
I don't have a lot of sympathy, and I think I watched. There were some clips. I think Rubio had an interview with Catherine Herridge, actually, that was on X, and Rubio in that interview described how, look, we thought we had an understanding with Zelensky about the fact that we're going to work together on this deal, and then we hear him saying, like, I'm not going to sign anything, and Rubio basically said something along the lines of, well, that's not very productive for our relationship going forward, and I think that there must have. Somebody had a talk with Zelensky that's like, do you like your job? Do you want to keep it?
Well, I mean, there is an argument that, Russia's after Zelensky's head, and as long as the United States is kind of standing in between Russia and Zelensky gets to keep his head.
Right. I think Zelensky might have made a call to the Polish where the Polish were like, you can't piss off the Americans like this. Like they are your patron. You get to,
we're
the idea that you get to just operate independently of the Americans, like, that's not your situation. Sorry, bro.
How much do you think this stems from the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Zelensky?
Well, there's a good amount of that. I think that if Zelensky had been more I think about Netanyahu as a good example of a comparison, right? Like, Trump's not going to Netanyahu and demanding like mineral rights in Israel, partially because Netanyahu and Israel are able to defend themselves a lot more effectively. But in particular, I think that Zelensky has just played the global neoliberal card so aggressively. Like, he's like, I'm, he's just of the left. And then Donald Trump comes into power and it's like, oh yeah, maybe this is a reason that countries that are dependent on American aid try not to weigh in on our domestic politics, because it goes from one way to another. And, I think at a certain point, you got to wonder if Zelensky's got to realize he's going to need to resign. He's going to need to, his relationship with Trump is simply not strong enough, that the Ukrainians need someone new in there to have like a fresh start in terms of their relationship with the Trump administration.
So this is the first time that I've heard actually anyone articulate that. Can you expand on it?
Yeah. So
the idea of Zelensky resigning.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing a little bit of that. I mean, I don't know that that's ever been discussed officially, but if you're running the government of Ukraine right now, you can't be in a position where you have a bad relationship with the United States government.
No way.
It makes your position untenable. Like, if you think about sitting in your shoes, imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a Ukrainian voter and what you would want your government to be doing. And if you actually cared about winning this war or cared about a reasonable settlement, which you probably do, you don't want to get screwed over. So you'd say, well, it's whatever the reason and whatever the justice of your cause, Vladimir, like, we can't have you being on bad terms with Trump. Like, you just can't. I mean, we would say the same thing if you were thinking about your own, what you would want is your own leader. You'd want your own leader to be on good terms with the president of the United States. And so you'd be pissed at him for like creating this tension with people like Vance and Rubio. You'd be pissed at him for going off and saying all sorts of nasty stuff, because you'd be saying to yourself, rationally, the worse your relationship with Trump is, the worse it's going to be for me and my family. So that's why I think, like, ultimately I suspect Zelensky, I don't think he'll make it through the year. I think that's my guess. Like, and I'm not basing that on like any internal knowledge. I'm just sort of looking at the situation and thinking, this is not tenable. And eventually, top level Ukrainian politicians are going to say to him, like, you need to go, bro. Like, we need a fresh start with Trump.
It's crazy to me. Like, when Trump took office again, and we keep talking about economic sanctions and tariffs, and you see all of the times that he would level these on other countries, they would bluster and say, we're not gonna bend the knee. They would eventually bend the knee. You actually get a glimpse of just how powerful America could be if it actually cared about itself. It's insane to me.
Yes.
Like, I look at it and I'm just like, do you know how much more, like, as powerful as this country is, how much more we could take and do if we actually cared about our own self-interest?
That is a great point, and I think that most Americans don't realize, because
That's just
feel
economic.
the exact same way. Like the way that our government has behaved for the past, for 12 of the past 16 years has been as if we could not risk upsetting anyone else. And the way that Trump exercises power, soft power, clearly, because he's not gotten us into any kind of wars, and he's made far greater overtures toward peace with our adversaries, or with what people that we consider adversaries. I'm thinking of North Korea specifically. The things that are possible for the United States really become clear. And I think that, again, that's a great point, because I felt the same way. I guess I didn't really understand how much soft power the United States had. It's clear that the U.S. can blow up every other country, right? Like, if we want.
That's what I'm saying. That's the difference. Like, whenever we thought of that before, we thought it was through might. Right? Like, but then people would make the joke like, yeah, but you haven't won a war in however many decades, right? That's not the point.
I have a problem with that argument, but go ahead.
The point being is that, look, we're not even talking about intervention of the U.S. military. We're just saying that we're going to slap sanctions on you, we're going to cut off trade, and then you start to realize just how big and powerful the nation is. And it's crazy to me how much, like you said, the left will gaslight you and say, these other nations are laughing at us. I'm like, if they are, it's because they don't care about their own self-interest. Because if they do, they understand that they're going to lose out by not being involved with us, whether it's through trade, whether it's through the use of our military to protect their own borders. There's 1,000 ways in which we could be doing more for our country that we're starting to do now. And I worry that the second you lose power, then it just goes back to the way it was. You have to start imparting the idea that our own self-interest is key.
So that's one thing that I want to get your take on, Will. Like, I agree completely with what Brett's saying. And I think that the idea of America first has been so foreign to Americans, we don't understand the potential that our country has. And I think that Donald, because we were talking earlier about the MAGA coalition versus the left, I think that Donald Trump has really demonstrated that the United States can do great things for itself and still operate in a moral and ethical way internationally. And this is how not just the right, though the right is probably, screaming how much they love it, but this is the way that the right and the not left should look at the not left, the whoever isn't in the crazy leftist. This is the way that politicians should act towards the United States. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I think, for a long time we had on the left a sort of general globalist internationalist sense that we shouldn't be rocking the boat, that we should be seeking consensus, that we should just be doing what everybody else wants. And on the right had antibodies against that, because the right's historically more nationalist, anti-UN, for example. But the right also has this long-standing free trade approach that would totally exclude the idea of using tariffs as an economic weapon as a way to get people to serve our interests. And the combination of those two things meant it's like, well, we have hard power or nothing, and most of the time it's nothing to get people to behave the way we want. And Trump comes in, he's like, well, I'm obviously not some internationalist cuck. And then also like obviously not. And then, but also that I'm not at the same time afraid of using tariffs. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around and be like, wait a second, you all are completely dependent on access to our market. Your economies are completely dependent on access to American consumers. So guess what? You get to do what we want, because otherwise we're gonna make your access to our consumers painful, and you can't afford that. And that's just the nature of how having such an incredibly powerful economy here allows us to exert force abroad and get people to do what we want.
He kind of got into it in the first term. He's like, well, what has the UN or NATO done for us?
Yeah.
in the last however many decades. And people, maybe just that was the first time anybody thought of asking the question, oh yeah, what have any of them done for us?
Yeah, well, the NATO is us. We spend more than the rest of the NATO countries combined on our military.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And a lot of them are, deciding to buff up their welfare states and not meet GDP targets. Their spending as a percentage of GDP targets.
The idea that every NATO country is supposed to spend 2% of their own GDP, right? Is I think that's what the agreement is. The U.S. I just recently learned only spends 3.6% of our GDP on our military. That's something that if you tell your average leftist, they're going to be like, no way. They're going to say, no, we must spend half the money that of our GDP on. We spend so much money on the military and blah blah blah. And whereas we do in absolute dollars, we spend a lot, but it's because the United States GDP is like $29 trillion. It's just a mind-boggling amount of money. And then to think that we ask, countries like Poland Poland is I think is one of the better.
Poland meets its targets.
Yeah, like sure. they're really good about it, and they spend 2% of their GDP. And I don't know what Poland's GDP is, but it's obviously dramatically less than the United States. Because they're just a smaller country with fewer people, and so the actual ask of the individual European countries or other countries in NATO in absolute dollars is minuscule compared to what the United States.
And then they get, they really start talking about how we're like being, appeasing. I really can't stand
Unreal.
that. Countries that are tiny that do not even meet their target on NATO spending. Like, you're tiny in the first place and you don't even spend 2% of your GDP on your military. And then you're telling us that we're appeasing. Like, this isn't, I don't care what you think.
Yeah, it's not even a real conversation.
Like you're like a chihuahua yapping at us. Like, you're not a serious country. Like you get to, if we start defending you'd fall to Russia in an instant. So be grateful for the continued support of the American taxpayer. Despite the fact that you guys have been obnoxious towards our current sitting president.
That is a lot of where I think a lot of the leftist arguments come in these days about when you see people, coalescing online and talking about healthcare, and they talk about it in foreign countries, and we talk about how they say, oh, it's amazing that Americans don't just get free healthcare. And then we say, well, that's because your military is pretty much subsidized by the might of our military. I get that anger. Like, I do. I understand that that's a very simplistic argument, but I do understand the anger from the average American who does think, maybe the hospital, maybe all your medical bills shouldn't be covered, but you shouldn't go into insane debt because you broke your arm. Mm-hmm. And to know that we're doing that so that we can defend other countries is infuriating on some level. So I get that argument. Yeah,
I do. I think that most of that kind of perspective comes from a lack of understanding of what the actual problem is, because the idea that you shouldn't go into you shouldn't have to go into hock just because you break your arm.
Yeah.
Well, breaking your arm is, while it's a bad thing, it's something that modern medicine is very capable of dealing with, and it happens frequently enough where it shouldn't cost you $10,000 to get your arm x-rayed and set.
And medical, and then you get into insurance.
It shouldn't be at all. You should. You can go and get your teeth cleaned from a dentist for a couple $100. That should probably be $50 because it takes them like 10 minutes nowadays. And that is still, it's not outrageously expensive to get your, spend $150, $200 to get your teeth cleaned. It shouldn't be more than a couple $100 to get an arm set, because it's something that's fairly routine, and unless they need to do, put in, steel and those kind of repairs.
You go in and they're like, we need to take an X-ray, and then they set them on like, we need to take another X-ray, and the poor person's like, do you need to do the second X-ray?
Well, but the point being is like when we talk about plastic surgery or LASIK or those kind of procedures that aren't covered, all of that stuff, the prices have gone down because, and this is where I'm most libertarian, the market does work. The market does drive prices down. It's a miracle that it happens and that it works the way that it does. But because we don't have a market for health care, all the prices are going to be through the roof because the insurance companies just pay. It's a nightmare, but that's not the fault of the American population. That's because of the government.
Well, and then the scary part is they somehow turn that on its head and say that is an argument for single payer healthcare, and then you're like, hold up,
that's insane too.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.